Hello everyone. It's been a while. Apologies for my long hiatus. I've been pretty preoccupied with working on some of the longer form content that needs some more time in the oven before it's ready to be uploaded. For now, let's talk about the latest season of Invincible, specifically the theme of trauma this season, because many of the central arcs this season have revolved around trauma in some way. Mark's arc is the fear of ending up like his father. Debbie's is having to face the reality that the husband she had been in love with for years was not the person she thought he was. Nolan's is learning that the philosophies and ideologies he had learned growing up as a Viltrumite may potentially be wrong and harmful to others. Eve is trying to be her own person, but when things start going wrong, she goes back to her toxic mental state, thinking that her parents were right about her all along. There are more characters who go through some form of trauma this season, but you get the idea. Every character goes through some form of trauma throughout the season. However, the character I mainly want to talk about in this video is Mark Grayson. While other characters do have forms of trauma to work through, none are as significant as Mark's. But just because Mark is the video's main focus does not mean I won't be covering the other characters in the show. Now that we've made that clear, we can begin. One of the main parallels in the season the show likes to draw from is the other Marks compared to our Mark. This can be seen as early as the beginning of the season when Invincible is fighting the Immortal. There are many differences to draw from, but the main one is that Mark has teamed up with Omni-Man in this universe to take over Earth. While fighting Invincible, Immortal comments on how arrogant Mark is and that he's just like his father. Not only is this one of the first lines in the show, but it also sets up the central premise for what Mark's arc will be this season. However, the show also points out a massive parallel between this Mark and our Mark. In this universe, when Mark hears this comment, he enjoys being compared to his father because he is someone he looks up to, just like in Season 1, where Mark's primary focus is trying to be like his dad and follow in his footsteps. He also does things similarly to his father, like breaking Eve's neck so he can keep her as a pet of sorts, similar to how Nolan called Debbie a pet in the Season 1 finale. In contrast, our Mark is trying his hardest not to be like his father. In fact, when he is compared to him throughout the season, he gets repulsed by the statement.
You can't stop me. I don't need your permission to be a superhero.
You know who else said that to me?
I'm not my dad. I'm not my dad!
This is a crucial distinction to remember because it will be constantly called back to throughout the season, whether it's by the main villain, or by Mark refusing to bow down to the Viltrumite Empire. The show makes it very clear how different Mark is from these other Marks. We then transition into one of the season's most important scenes, the Karma Police scene, where Mark is going through the motions of daily life, saving civilians, trying to prove to everyone, but most importantly, himself, that he is not like his father. Even something like flying, something that was highlighted in the first season as something Mark loved doing, is now something that no longer brings any joy to him. The act of Mark flying looks so dull and lifeless that you can see how broken Mark is. And since Mark is not on his A game, he does a pretty sloppy job dealing with these crises throughout the montage, which Cecil later points out in the episode. However, the most important detail in this entire sequence is the lyrics. If you pay attention, you'll notice that many of the lyrics align with Mark's mental state, like the line, which is very accurate to Mark's character. For the first half of the season, Mark is trying to do more because in his mind, it is not enough. He feels responsible for the attack and is trying to make up for it in any way he can. This is why we see him never letting himself take a break. You'll notice that he's always on call to Cecil and keeping himself occupied by trying to find people to save. The second piece of lyrics that aligns with Mark is the song's outro portion. The meaning here is pretty obvious. Throughout the season, Mark has moments where he feels like he will lose control and turn into his dad, like in episode 7 when Anissa threatens to kill Amber. We see that rage inside that makes him like his father, bubble up right before us. It's not until the season finale that he completely loses control, he loses himself, and kills Angstrom Levy. However, the song does not only reflect Mark, it also reflects the Viltrumites. The first 2 verses in the song accurately describe what the Viltrumite regime will be like. However, instead of the Viltrumites arresting people, they will be killing civilians for trying to oppose them. The song's chorus continues to reflect the Viltrumites further, with the lyrics saying,
This is what you'll get. This is what you'll get. This is what you'll get when you mess with us.
I'm honestly surprised that the crew behind Invincible picked out a song that accurately reflects Mark and the Viltrumites. I know the crew is great at picking out songs for the show, but this just takes the cake. Right after the Karma Police montage, we cut to a news report describing the aftermath of the battle in Chicago between Omni-Man and Invincible. It's a standard world-building technique used in storytelling to let the audience know how everyone outside the main characters are doing. I'm only mentioning this because of a particular line that stood out to me when the news reporter mentioned the aftermath of the battle for Chicago, that line being,
The battle, the devastation, the cost in lives. For some, the pain will never fade. But for many others, the healing has already begun.
It is such an integral line because no matter how much time passes, what happened to Mark is something he will never forget. The pain that was caused that day will never go away. He will always put himself on the hook for what happened, despite there being nothing he could have done to stop it. He does this frequently throughout the season, where there will be moments when lives have been lost, and Mark immediately assigns the blame to himself for not being able to save everyone in the process. In fact, he does it when he tries going back to his regular life. He sees it as a waste of time when he could be out there saving more people. He almost misses his graduation when he's fighting Doc Seismic, and spends the entirety of his free time on call to Cecil. This behavior is only exacerbated when seeing constant reminders of his fight with his father when he's trying to go back to normal again. This applies not only to Mark, but also to Debbie. More on her later though. After barely making it through school, Mark contacts Cecil to try and convince him to get back out there again, but Cecil doesn't have any of it. He knows that Mark has been through a lot, and if he lets him back out there again, it could get messy fast. He lectures Mark, and when Mark says Cecil can't stop him from doing what he wants, Cecil does something that he will do a lot early on in the season. Comparing Mark to his father, Cecil is a control freak, so he tries his hardest to regain control when things don't go his way. Throughout the season, Mark will do things that go against what Cecil wants him to do, which causes Cecil to try and manipulate Mark by comparing him to his father to get what he wants. This causes Mark to try and prove himself to Cecil by saying that he will follow orders as long as he gets back out there, and thus bringing us to the Mauler fight. When Mark arrives, he orders the Mauler twins to shut down whatever they are doing, and when they refuse, Mark gets excited. He hasn't been in a proper fight in a long time and has a chance to release some of his frustration onto some bad guys. Unfortunately, everything falls apart quickly when Angstrom causes the warehouse to explode, nearly killing everyone in the process. When Mark gets up, all he can do is stare at the destruction caused by the explosion. He is reminded of what happened in Chicago, all the lives he wasn't able to save, the blood on his hands. It also serves as a neat little parallel to the final episode of the season when Mark kills Levy. He also looks at the blood on his hands. This is why Invincible stands there for a few seconds before doing anything in his battle with Doc Seismic. He's not only assessing the situation to try and determine the best outcome, but he is also awaiting Cecil's orders on what to do next, because it's like as Cecil says in the first episode.
And whatever they were planning, you stopped them. This is what happens when you follow my orders. We did good today, do you understand me?
Throughout the rest of the episode, Cecil has Mark carry out some interesting jobs for him, like stopping a discount man and getting married to a fish princess. Of course, the reason why Cecil is doing this is because he's trying to test for any weaknesses that Mark has that can potentially be used against the Viltrumites. During one of these missions, Mark goes to Midnight City, where Man is causing trouble. Mark tries stopping him politely at first, but when he gets thrown into the Shadowverse, Mark turns into his father momentarily, telling Darkwing that,
Like you said, I'm Omni-Man's son. You have no idea what I'm capable of.
There are many moments throughout the season where Mark has sequences where you can see glimpses of his father inside of him, or moments where he can feel the parts of his father boiling up inside him. These moments make him want to improve himself, where he wants to be better. However, with all the responsibilities in Mark's life, he isn't able to have the full range to improve upon himself, so all of his responsibilities stack up on top of each other and cause him more stress in his life. One of those responsibilities is Mark's girlfriend, Amber. Back in Season 1, Mark got together with a girl named Amber. Throughout Season 1, Mark's availability was the main cause of strain in the relationship. Because Mark had a secret identity to keep, he had to keep lying to Amber to protect her. Later in the season, Mark confesses to Amber about his secret identity. It's quite an infamous scene because of Amber's reaction, but that's a can of worms to open for another time. Because of Mark's confession, you'd think that the main problem in the relationship would cease to exist. However, Season 2 shows the audience that life really is so simple. Mark still has to abandon Amber. It's just that Amber now knows the real reason why he has to leave, instead of constantly being lied to. It doesn't fix the issue that Mark barely has time for her. Throughout the season, the show does an excellent job of showing all the problems continuing to build up until everything inevitably falls apart. At first, everything seemed like it was going well. They were going to the same university, meaning that they'd have the opportunity to spend more time with each other. But then, the next episode is when all the problems start adding up. Mark takes Amber on a date, and gets interrupted by Cecil, who needs him for a job. Then, Mark has to go to space and leaves for 2 months, before returning, only having to go to space once again to help out with an alien invasion. All of this stuff culminates in a massive drift in the relationship. When Mark returns home, and finally has time for a date with Amber, it feels really awkward. The relationship no longer feels the same as it once was. But despite them having seemingly drifted apart over these past couple of months, they still try to make things work. They both confide in people they trust for advice, and try to make the most of the relationship. It gets to the point where Mark convinces Cecil to give him 2 days of the week off, so he can have free time to continue his studies and spend time with Amber. The reason I'm talking about Mark and Amber's relationship in a video about Mark's trauma is because there are 2 specific scenes I want to break down. The first is Mark's conversation with his mother when he asks her for dating advice, and the second is the final date between Mark and Amber before they are interrupted by Anissa. The first scene I will talk about is probably one of my favorite scenes in the show. Mark comes home and confides in his mother, similar to how he confided in her back in Season 1. Mark asks his mother what it was like to date his dad. He asks this not only because he wants to avoid his dad's mistakes when dating his mother, but also because he doesn't want to end up like his dad, constantly neglecting the ones he loves most. His mother talked about how thrilling it was to date him. It was unlike anything she had ever experienced, and she was also incredibly lonely, similar to how Amber has been experiencing the relationship. Mark realizes this during his conversation with her. He realizes he has been treating Amber like Nolan has been to Debbie. He continues the discussion by asking his mother some very tough questions, for if she regrets ever meeting his father, or what would happen if she didn't have Mark or Oliver. Debbie responds the only way she can, by saying that she doesn't know, because the truth would only hurt Mark, and Oliver when he grows older. Mark should know that she would have an everyday life, living with non-superpowered people. She loves Mark dearly, but knows how much sacrifice the superhero lifestyle takes. So if she never had children, then Debbie definitely would have preferred to have never met Nolan to begin with. She clearly would like to live a life without this much burden and trauma, but she doesn't regret it because she has Mark and Oliver. The reason why Mark is even bothering to ask these questions in the first place is because Mark feels insecure. He has the same powers as his dad does, and he feels responsible for everything that has happened with his father. Debbie is well aware of this, so she would rather lie than break his heart even more. It shows how much Debbie loves her children and how much of a good mother she is. After Mark talks to his mother, he tries to make things work between him and Amber. He still has to be a superhero, but wants to make time for the woman he loves. So he convinces Cecil to give him some time off twice a week. All is well until Mark gets confronted by a Viltrumite named Anissa. She threatens to kill Amber if Mark doesn't comply with her orders. Mark complies, and reluctantly leaves Amber alone so he can face off against Anissa. When Mark returns to Amber, she is rightfully upset. Sure, dating a superhero is fun in the moment, but in the long term, you have to deal with constant disappearances, being in danger, and practically no agency in the relationship. It is an extremely tragic scene. Mark just wanted to live a happy life, and despite the Viltrumites, he wanted to so badly, but obligation after obligation came, robbing him months of time that could have been spent being happy with friends and family. Anissa was truly the last straw that broke the camel's back in this situation. She was Mark's foil, the thing that killed any sense of normalcy Mark once had. His coming to that realization, as well as the many temptations of violence he feels similar to his father, and endangering Amber, all hit him like a truck in this scene. There was never going to be a happy ending to this chapter in Mark's life. And looking back on it, there never was going to be one. This relationship was unfortunately set to fail the second they got together. The way the relationship ends is not full of screaming and arguing, it's just two people realizing that their being together just wasn't meant to be. Hell, they don't even say "I break up with you." They know that the audience is smart enough to understand that this is the last straw in their relationship. It makes the scene more impactful, and it broke my heart a little when I watched it play out.
Hello, son. It's been a while.
In episode 3 of season 2, Mark is greeted by a Thraxan disguised as his favorite fictional character, Seance Dog. He needs Invincible to come to their planet to stop some meteors. A neat little touch to this scene is that since Nolan talked about his son on Thraxa, the Thraxan bug would take the form of Seance Dog, since it is Mark's favorite fictional character. When Mark arrives at Thraxa, he notices the lack of meteors and becomes suspicious. The Thraxan bug reassures him, explaining that the Monarch will explain everything Mark needs to know. When the Monarch is introduced, it turns out to be none other than Omni-Man himself. When Mark sees his father, he is not only confused, but totally shocked to see him. After all this time, Mark has probably been thinking of all the things he wants to say to his father, all the hate and misery his father has caused. And when Mark sees him again for the first time in months, the only words he can muster up saying is "Dad." Once the shock is out of his system, his anger kicks in. He clenches his fist and approaches his father. As he approaches him, he takes his mask off. I think that this is Mark's way of telling Nolan to look at him, to look at his son thoroughly, and to see the pain that he has caused him. Mark proceeds to grunt at Nolan as an intimidation tactic, but Nolan doesn't even flinch. When Mark clenches his fists even more, Nolan readies himself for an attack. He almost hits Mark when he goes in for a hug, expecting an attack instead. It's pretty sad. After everything he's put Mark and everyone on Earth through, he wouldn't have even let Mark have a pity punch to help let out all the anger Mark has towards his father. I also adore seeing Mark's reaction when he embraces his father. You can sense all the fear and anger, all the hatred and frustration, but even after everything Nolan has done, Mark still loves his father at the end of the day, even after everything he's done. Then he switches back to being angry at his father again for lying to him. Even if this time Nolan's lying was for the best, Mark is understandably upset that he has been lied to again after everything Nolan had done on Earth. Nolan's wording is especially unhelpful. He calls killing all those people and beating Mark half dead a mistake. When Nolan tells Mark what he wants him to say, Mark responds by asking him to say that he is sorry. Nolan says nothing despite all the changes he has made. He has had a long way to go and doesn't want to get off his high horse just yet. This is shown throughout the episode, such as how he reverts to the ruthless person he was a few seconds when he sees the Thraxans dead later in the episode. When Nolan tries to get Mark to help him and the Thraxans, Mark is still rightfully angry at his father for what happened, so he flies away. Nolan tries to convince him to return and help, but Mark has nothing else to say other than to remind his father of how much he hurt him. It's only when Nolan calls Mark out for saying that he doesn't care that Mark reluctantly changes his mind. He goes down to see what Nolan could want, but not without insulting his father a few more times, when Nolan kisses his new wife, Andressa, in front of Mark. This obviously makes Mark furious. After everything he's done, all the pain that Mark has suffered from his father, only to see that not only his father abandoned Earth, but also cheated on his mother with another woman. He not only cheats on his wife, but has a new baby with a bug, and expects Mark to care for his new brother, who is only half related to him. It's no surprise that Mark gets pissed off about all this. The emergence of Mark's half-brother further complicates matters, as it symbolizes Nolan's betrayal on a personal level. Mark sees his father embracing this new family, seemingly replacing the one he left behind. His half-brother's presence is a constant reminder of Nolan's deceit, and the fractured bond between father and son. Mark's feelings of abandonment and inadequacy intensify as he struggles to deal with his newfound sibling rivalry. He grapples with the fear of being replaced in his father's eyes. The sense of betrayal runs deep as Mark realizes that his father's actions have irreversibly altered their family dynamics. After Nolan explains more about this planet's potential danger from the Viltrumites, Mark has to decide whether to train with his father to learn how to beat them or leave the planet. However, before he can even make that decision, Viltrumite soldiers attack. Before Mark leaves with Andressa and Oliver to get them to safety, he still worries whether his father will be okay. When they enter the caves, Mark asks more about Oliver. Like his name. Sure, he told Nolan that he doesn't care about his brother and shouldn't be forced to do this, but even he admits that deep down he cares for his brother, and that he was only saying that because he was angry with his father. After some chatter, a Viltrumite soldier attacks them, and Mark tries desperately to defend them, only to be saved in the nick of time by Nolan. Unfortunately, Mark is placed in a predicament whether to help his dad or save Andressa and Oliver. This is a hard decision for Mark, but ultimately, he decides to save Andressa and his brother because they are the priority in this situation. It also plays into Mark's mindset of needing to save someone. Nolan is strong, he can handle himself in combat, but they are much weaker and won't survive if they're crushed. So he saves them, and Nolan decimates Lucan. When Mark and Nolan return to the Thraxans, they're both too late. All that can be seen for miles is the corpses of all the lives lost. Mark, once again, pins the responsibility on himself. However, he still checks up on his dad to ensure he's doing okay. It's a small detail, but it shows that he does care for his father, and all Nolan has is confliction. He cared for these species, but a part of them, his Viltrumite part of him, sees them as weak, deserving of their fate because of their weakness. But this other part of him, which he gained back on Earth, sees this as a tragedy. This is parallel to how Mark felt when Nolan was destroying Chicago, but because human emotions are so contagious, Nolan starts to feel these same emotions that humans do. He began caring for them the more time that he spent on Earth, and when it came time to take it over for the Viltrumite rule, he felt conflicted. He thought he could ignore those feelings he felt for everyone on Earth, and it was only because of Mark that he finally came to his senses and flew away as far as he could. While drifting through space, he contemplated running away from good at the black hole. Then he thought he had found an escape with the Thraxans, a chance to start over, but he couldn't escape his past, and now the guilt he had been running from hits him, and he panics. Cause as he said,
"You don't understand! I'm not supposed to feel this way! How is this better?"
This is how you should have felt on Earth.
he feels it, and he hates it, but he knows that this is right. He knows caring for others' lives is correct, but it hurts. It's his first heroic thought because he finally understands that the right thing doesn't always feel good. It's tragic because before all of this, all Nolan knew was violence, and that's all he's supposed to know. So when he starts having these feelings of grief and frustration, his first thought is to grab Mark by the throat immediately. I like that in this scene that Mark doesn't try to sympathize with Nolan. He immediately gives him a reality check on his ideology by saying,
"This is how you should have felt on Earth."
When he says this to Nolan, his words cut right through him. He doesn't know what to say. He is speechless. Before Nolan has the chance to say anything further, the Viltrumite soldiers mock him. Nolan and Mark proceed to battle the both of them. However, Mark holds back. After everything, he still doesn't want to be like his father, even if that means getting himself killed in the process. If he killed people, then that would make him just like his father, but in this situation, he doesn't have a choice. Mark and Nolan regroup, and Nolan lectures him on how if he doesn't kill, then everyone he cares about will die. The show then calls back to what he said in the season 1 finale.
You're fighting so you can watch everyone around you die! Think, Mark! If you're not trying to kill her, you're going to die. Don't think, act!
And just like both lines being lectured to Mark, he doesn't listen to Nolan. Not until he sees the dead Thraxan corpses around him while fighting Thula does he start to hold back less. However, an important thing to note is that he still holds back. A cool little parallel I noticed while rewatching the season is that Mark makes for the same move as Omni-Man in the Immortal fight, with one key difference. Instead of using his fingers to slice her head off, he uses his fist to knock her back. A slight difference, but one worth noting. And when Mark finally has Thula at his mercy, he hesitates. It's as Mark says, he doesn't want to kill people, so being forced to decide to finally end someone's life, even if it is someone who has done a lot of evil, is still a tough decision to make for him. And it's that moment of hesitation that costs him greatly. When Nolan sees that Mark is about to get killed, he breaks Thula's jaw and lets his guard down. Then suddenly, Lucan breaks Nolan's back from behind. When Mark wakes up, he sees his father getting taken away by the Viltrumites, and the last words he hears from his father are, "Read my books." Not "I love you" or "I'll miss you," but "read my books." Obviously, Nolan is giving his son a clue, but it's very understandable why Mark is hurt and confused by this. Mark must feel deeply wounded by his father's cold goodbye, as it starkly contrasts with the loving relationship they once shared. Instead of receiving a heartfelt goodbye or an impression of love, he's left with an enigmatic command to delve further into his father's past, adding a layer of complexity to their already strained dynamic. Simultaneously, Mark may have a bit of hope, clinging to the belief that there's still a chance to understand his father's actions through the pages of his books. Perhaps buried within the lines of Nolan's past exploits lies the key to unlocking the mystery behind his sudden change in behavior. Mark may feel compelled to honor his father's final request, driven by curiosity, desperation, and a desire to salvage some semblance of their fractured relationship. When Mark wakes up again, he is greeted by General Krieg. Mark's first instinct is to ask about his father. However, Krieg ignores the question and tells him to stop talking and to listen. Because Mark survived the first battle between the Viltrumites, he has proven himself worthy of replacing his father for the task of taking over Earth. Mark, hearing that he is even a worthy Viltrumite, disgusts him to his core and tells Krieg to go fuck himself. Before he can even finish his sentence, Krieg punches him in the face. He continues to tell him that his father will be executed, and that if he does not follow through with their plan, they will kill millions. This is where Mark is truly tested. He does not want to become his father, and yet he is put in this unwinnable situation where he has to become his father, or millions will die. For Mark, the thought of mirroring Omni-Man's actions is abhorrent, a betrayal of everything he stands for. Despite the threats towards his planet, Mark still refuses to stoop to his father's level, even for a second, to the point where he would rather die than do something as disgusting as that. However, unbeknownst to Mark's knowledge, that is not the only thing he should be worrying about.
Hello, Mark. When are you coming home?
Angstrom serves as the perfect foil to Mark this season. Mark's entire arc is him trying his hardest not to end up like his father. He blames himself for all the tragedy that has happened because of his insecurity and inadequacy to stop his father in time. Angstrom reflects Mark's inner subconscious. He blames Mark for how he ended up when there was nothing Mark could have done to save the civilians in Chicago or Angstrom. Because his brain gets scrambled from the machine, he refuses to accept that the explosion was his own doing. Not only that, but because of this machine, all of his memories have been mixed in with multiple other variants of him, which means that he cannot tell which memories are his and which aren't. Because of the confusion, Levy enacts his plan for revenge on Invincible. His presence throughout the season is slowly built up, appearing very infrequently throughout the season, and just when you've forgotten about him, he comes back, more intimidating than ever. After everything Mark has been through, opposing the Viltrum Empire, breaking it off with Amber, his securities about him potentially becoming his father, and facing the reality that his father is going to be executed, and he'll never get to see him again, this almost sets him over the edge. When Mark confronts Levy in the final episode, he tries his hardest to calm him down. However, Angstrom doesn't care. He sees Mark as the villain in this situation, and when Mark forgets who Levy is, that only sets him off even more, thinking this only proves his point that Mark doesn't remember the people he's hurt, when that couldn't be further from the truth. Mark constantly gives Angstrom multiple chances to help him throughout the finale. Mark understands the pain he has been through and how it affected him, but Angstrom is too deluded to accept any help, since he believes Mark has killed millions, that Mark is the true monster, and he is the good guy in this situation. So he sends Mark to multiple dimensions to soften him up, so he can kill Mark with his hands when he is finally ready. It was not until Mark saw what Angstrom did to Debbie that he finally lost control. He lets out all his frustrations, telling him how much he's been holding back, and kills Angstrom. This is the moment in the show that we see Mark most like his father. The way he beats Angstrom is similar to how Omni-Man did it to Mark in the Season 1 finale. It all culminated at this point, where that side of Mark, the side that is like his father, won. When he finally comes out of the rage, he sees what has happened and looks at his hands, paralleling what Omni-Man did in the Season 1 finale. He realizes what he has done, and all he can do is go into complete shock and be disgusted with himself. He then tries to justify it to himself more and more until he finally accepts that he lost control. He doesn't know what else to do, so all he can do is let out everything he's feeling, all the pain and all the sadness. He is stranded on this planet, and in Mark's head, all he can do is sit there and slowly die, having to live with what he's done. When he finally finds a way back home, things aren't the same for Mark. He talks to Cecil, and while Cecil tries consoling him by saying that he's not his father, Mark responds by saying that he wasn't there. Mark lost himself for a moment, and he won't be letting himself off the hook for it. Cecil tells him to go home and get some rest, but Mark just can't rest after that day, so he takes to the skies to let everything out. This scene is one of my favorite moments in the series. In the clamor of Mark's mental breakdown amidst the sky, you can't help but empathize with him. The weight of his actions bears down upon him like an anchor, dragging him into the depths of despair as he reflects on his admiration for his father, Nolan, and the desire to be like him. Mark is consumed by an enormous sense of regret. Every word of admiration he once uttered now echoes in his mind like a haunting refrain, a painful reminder of the illusions of his father he once held dear. The conflict within Mark's psyche is palpable as he grapples with the moral complexities of his actions. While he had no other choice but to confront Angstrom Levy and ultimately end his life, the guilt chews at him incessantly. He finds himself trapped in a vicious cycle of self-criticism, haunted by the memories of his inability to stop his father's destructive rampage, and now by his own perceived failure to prevent himself from succumbing to violence. The disillusionment Mark experiences is profound, as he confronts the stark reality that his powers have not granted him the sense of control that he had once hoped for. In the aftermath of the Season 1 finale, he had harbored a glimmer of optimism, believing that with his abilities, he could go through his life as a hero with relative ease. Yet, as he stares into the abyss of his turmoil, that hope feels like nothing more than a cruel illusion. Stripped of the trappings of an everyday life, he finds himself adrift in a void of uncertainty, his relationships strained, and his sense of purpose called into question. Amidst this amalgamation of emotions, Mark's rage is not just a manifestation of his frustration, but a primal scream of anguish, a desperate plea for understanding in a world that seems intent on tearing him apart. As he soars through the skies, consumed by the storm raging within him, you can't help but hope that Mark will eventually be okay, that he'll hopefully be fine. The "I thought you were stronger" line isn't just meant for Angstrom, but also for Mark. He tried his hardest not to end up like his dad, and when he finally succumbed to that rage that made him like his father, he became disappointed in himself. He thought he was stronger mentally, but in reality, he's still human, despite his powers, and take any person's loved ones and harm them, put them in danger, take their lives, and any person in that same situation will snap undoubtedly. When Mark arrives home with Debbie and Oliver, things are different. They are back to how things felt. When Debbie thinks they are returning to some semblance of normalcy, someone takes it away every time for them. When Mark hears this, he doesn't say anything like, "it'll be okay," because he knows that's a lie, and something his father would say. All he does is put his arm around her back to comfort her. He then confesses to her that he's quitting college, and after Debbie tries to persuade Mark, she eventually understands why this is so important to him. At the end of the day, all the stuff like college was creating more unnecessary conflict for him than he needed. So Mark deciding to quit college to focus on himself was definitely the right thing to do. Later, Mark decides to meet Eve to confess his feelings to her. However, when the moment comes, he holds off. It makes sense why he doesn't. He just broke up with Amber. He's still too emotionally raw from the fight with Levy and everything that came from it. The last thing he needs right now is to bring more baggage into a relationship. What Mark needs right now, and thankfully, Eve provides, is a friend who is there for him, who lets him know that it's okay to hurt inside, and that he doesn't deserve the awful things that have happened to him. And that foundation is simple. Unconditional care is the mortar of the relationship going forward. The seeds of romance are often best sown in the soil of friendship. It's ultimately the best thing for their relationship moving forward. I'm glad the writers don't immediately rush into it. It ends the season on a quite sweet and hopeful note moving forward, which is probably what most audiences can hope for. In a video about Invincible and the themes of trauma, Debbie is almost impossible not to mention. After the events in Chicago, Debbie is no longer the same person she once was. She is broken and all over the place. She tries to keep herself together for Mark, but inside, she is drowning in rage and sadness. This is shown throughout the first few episodes of the season. Debbie will try holding herself together, but inevitably, the pain is more than she can bear, and she breaks down. In the first episode, she goes out of the house for the first time in a while, and sees the destruction that no one has caused right across the street. The next time is when Olga checks up on Debbie. No one is unintentionally brought up in the conversation. This causes all the memories to come flooding back to her, which is when Olga brings up the real reason why she's here. Before she leaves, she offers Debbie a card that provides group therapy to people who were married to superheroes. Debbie claims that she is fine, but after everything she's been through, that is not the case. And Mark sees that near the end of the episode as well, when Debbie has been drinking herself unconscious. In the comics, Debbie's alcoholism is shown pretty overtly. However, I think the show does a way better job of presenting Debbie's alcoholism as more of a subtle thing throughout the season. When she wakes up, she sees that Mark is all bloodied and bruised, and Mark explains that he's working for Cecil. Debbie doesn't like this, and exclaims her frustrations in the next episode. Throughout the conversation with Olga, Debbie vents her frustrations with Nolan calling her a pet, a theme that will be continued later. In the next episode, Debbie talks to Mark about how nice it would be to get away from the house, and calls it a graduation present for Mark, showing that even this house is a constant reminder of Nolan. So she fixates on tiny issues with the house, like a broken kitchen cabinet. This is the leading cause of her frustration throughout the episode. She finds a broken mailbox, even when she tries to get out of the house and do her job, and when she returns home, she fixates on the broken cabinet, leading her to breaking down completely. When Mark comes home, she pushes him away at first, refusing to let him see her like this, but eventually, she lets her son embrace her. Both of them silently acknowledge that they aren't okay. As much as they would like to pretend that everything is fine, they are ultimately confronted with the harsh reality that everything is not okay. It's also not helped while breaking down. Debbie sees her son, battered and bruised, serving as a reminder that Mark is risking death on a daily basis and has no way to stop it. She tries to stop it earlier in the episode, when she reprimands Cecil for putting Mark back out there and ordering him around. In both scenes where she gets really angry, she tells people that she's angry with the people they're controlling aren't their pets. However, she corrects herself with Cecil. She almost says it, but corrects herself by saying soldier instead. The breakdown was inevitable, the constant reminders of Nolan and all the pain she's going through, and when she finally has an outlet to let it all out, she takes it. When Mark finally goes to college in the next episode, Debbie is alone. She's now more alone than ever, which is when she decides to give the group therapy a shot. However, it all goes terribly wrong when Debbie pours her heart out to another group member, who is married to one of the guardians that Nolan killed. Instead of empathy or understanding why she'd be hurt, all she gets is blamed for what happened. She now has nowhere to go, and no one she can latch onto, so she wanders the streets. The scene where Debbie wanders through the streets is purposefully meant to parallel the scene where Omni-Man drifts through space. However, there is one key difference. In the scene with Omni-Man, Nolan is slowly flying towards a black hole, trying to end it all, until he is saved when he finds his purpose in life again when meeting the Thraxans. However, in the scenes with Debbie, she isn't saved by anyone or anything. She is the one who stops herself from going through with it, and proves that while Omni-Man is stronger physically, Debbie is the one who is strongest mentally. Debbie has gone through hell in this show, and is constantly questioning her own worth in this episode, and what the past 20 years even meant. It's not until Art comes in later in the episode, to help her see how much worth she has as a person, that she can finally start to readjust in life. Before she was lost and alone, but when she saw that she practically raised Mark all by herself, she realized that she never really needed Nolan, and she slowly starts to let go. Even when Mark brings Oliver back in the next episode, while she does show signs of her old tendencies, she stays strong and manages to continue adjusting, even when she's tempted to put Oliver into Cecil's care. She still refuses, despite it being a reminder of the man she once loved. However, just as she began to glimpse a semblance of normalcy in her life, her world was again shaken by Angstrom Levy's arrival. Angstrom's intrusion shattered Debbie's hopes of returning to a normal life. The confrontation with Angstrom was a stark reminder that their family could never truly escape the consequences of Omni-Man's actions. No matter how hard Debbie and Mark try to rebuild their lives, nothing will ever be the same after Nolan's betrayal. The life they once knew is over, and there could be no return to the innocence they once had. In conclusion, Invincible Season 2 offers a detailed portrayal of the devastating effects of trauma. Through its characters' struggles, this season exposes the raw and unrelenting nature of psychological wounds, illustrating how they can fester and shape individuals in profound ways. Moreover, Invincible Season 2 forces viewers to confront uncomfortable truths about the cynical nature of trauma and the challenges of breaking free from its grip. The characters' attempts to navigate their pain often lead to further suffering, highlighting the almost seemingly inescapable nature of the trauma's hold. In its unflinching portrayal of trauma, Invincible Season 2 offers no easy answers or silver linings. Instead, it paints a grim reality in which healing is elusive and the scars of the past remain ever present. As an audience, all we can do is hope that things will get better, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye. To mention that I'm part of a podcast called Slopcast, and for our first episode, we had a very enjoyable discussion about Invincible Season 2. So if you've made it to the end of this video, and you are curious to hear me talk about Invincible some more, then I'd recommend checking out the stream. It'll be linked in the description, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you very much for watching.